Here's the uncomfortable truth. Money doesn't upgrade style. It just makes the mistakes more expensive. Robyn's wardrobe is a masterclass in misallocated resources. Designer handbag, expensive jewelry, a multi-million-dollar house, and then outfits that look as though they were selected in a dimly lit department store clearance aisle during a power outage. The contrast is impressive, in the way a chandelier is impressive when it's hanging over a folding table. This is not an indictment of where clothing comes from. Bargain racks can produce perfectly respectable pieces, and sometimes even a genuinely great blouse. They can also produce garments so visually aggressive they should come with protective eyewear. The issue is not the label on the tag. It is the consistent decision to choose the least flattering, most age-adding option available, as though budget grandma were a carefully curated aesthetic rather than an accidental outcome. The spending pattern makes the misfire even sharper. Money clearly exists. It is simply being routed toward the wrong categories. Collectible obsessions, expensive art, jewelry that reads more portfolio diversification than personal style. The implied logic seems to be that accessories and objects are investments, while clothing is an afterthought, despite clothing being the one investment that shows up on camera, in photographs, and in public, repeatedly, without the mercy of good lighting or nostalgia. A stylist would not need to reinvent the wheel. The solution is not necessarily more expensive clothes. It is better choices. Fewer purple-tinged florals. Fewer tops that look designed for someone who enjoys early bird specials as a hobby. More structure, better fit, and a coherent middle-age classic lane that accommodates modesty standards without sliding into Golden Girl before the opening credits. If a brand-name store were introduced into the equation, the concern remains that the same instincts would simply select the tackiest blouse available at a higher price point, because money cannot purchase taste, and it certainly cannot force someone out of the wrong decade. The most bewildering part is the apparent style evolution. Earlier years suggested something closer to age-appropriate presentation, more contemporary, less costume-like, without the heavy ringlets and relentless floral parade. Then came the Flagstaff era, where the aesthetic somehow committed fully to granny mode, as though the move included a mandatory wardrobe downgrade. This is especially curious, given the previously noted ability to dress with deliberate allure within a conservative social environment. That capacity did not disappear. It simply seems to have been replaced with a steadfast devotion to blouses that could be described generously as nostalgic. And it is not as though the surrounding cast provides a strong counterexample. From a clothing perspective, none of these women have consistently looked polished or thoughtfully styled. One eventually developed a clearer personal style later on, but overall, the group has long operated as if put together were optional. Still, Robyn's case stands out, because the visual incoherence collides so loudly with the visible spending elsewhere. In the end, the wardrobe communicates a simple message. The budget is not the problem. The priorities are. A competent financial planner might help. A competent stylist certainly would. At minimum, a friendly sales associate at a sensible store could guide the look away from budget grandma and towards something that does not add a decade out of pure habit. Because the current approach does not read understated, relatable, or casual. It reads like expensive jewelry trying to distract from a blouse determined to time travel back to 1987. The finale won't be a breakup. It'll be an asset split disguised as a love story. The endgame is practically writing itself, and it is not exactly a masterpiece of suspense. The series is visibly limping toward the finish line, not because the premise suddenly collapsed, but because the remaining content has devolved into a slow procession of aftermath. With the original three wives gone, the dynamic that once passed for narrative momentum has been replaced by a smaller, flatter domestic loop. Less plural family saga, More administrative wrap-up. Viewers call it boring now, as if it ever operated on a thrilling pace. The difference is that the boredom used to be distributed across multiple households and storylines. Now it concentrates in one place and becomes impossible to ignore. Production economics only sharpen the problem. Filming across 3 states and 4 cities is not a quaint artistic choice. It is a logistical expense. Add in the growing cast of peripheral figures who presumably require compensation, new spouses like David and Jen, plus adult children who still appear regularly. Maddie and Caleb are cited most often. And the math begins to look less like a sustainable franchise and more like a costly obligation. Yet the show does not end simply because it is stale. It ends when the ratings force a decision. And the inconvenient detail is that the franchise has never been exciting, and the audience has never stopped watching. So what happens if the curtain finally drops? The popular assumption is that the finale is also the collapse of the Cody and Robyn marriage. That theory rests on the idea that Robyn is already laying groundwork, planting explanations, positioning grievances, establishing a narrative that frames departure as necessity rather than choice. The claim is blunt. Monogamy was never the desired outcome, but it became the unavoidable outcome. And now it is being repackaged as a betrayal. Cody is described as volatile, frightening, and emotionally menacing, complete with the infamous murder face. And the suggestion is that this instability spills onto the children, creating the sort of household atmosphere that can be weaponized in a separation storyline. Add to that an insinuation that his sexual expectations are excessive, and the portrait becomes clear. The exit ramp is being paved with mental cruelty, and the toll booth is a carefully curated public justification. The legal rationale proposed is almost charming in its optimism. Divorce on the basis that plural marriage was promised and then not delivered. The complication, of course, is that plural marriage is not a legally protected marital expectation. It is, at best, an informal lifestyle claim attached to a legally monogamous marriage. The idea that a court would treat failure to maintain plural marriage as enforceable marital misconduct is, at minimum, questionable. The more plausible function of that argument is not legal strength, but public framing, an accusation designed to play well in interviews, not in court filings. Where the speculation gets more strategic is the house. There is an unverified but persistent claim that Robyn's mother, Alice, either helped finance the new McMansion, co-signed, or is on the deed. If that were true, it sets the stage for a clean, brutal maneuver. Ownership is structured so the house effectively stays with Robyn, with Alice's stake providing leverage and insulation. In that version of events, Robyn and Alice effectively control 2/3 of the property. The children, always referred to as the tenders, are invoked as immovable dependents, and downsizing becomes framed as an intolerable cruelty. The conclusion is inevitable. Cody moves out, not because he chooses to, but because the narrative will insist he must. And where does a displaced reality patriarch go when the cameras stop flattering him? The forecast is unglamorous. First comes the predictable scramble, an attempt to crawl back toward the women who already left, Janelle, possibly even Mary, or an awkward round of outreach to adult children, less reconciliation than logistical plea. If none of that yields a couch, the image becomes almost too on-brand. Retreat to the childhood homestead, hoping a relative offers a bunkhouse room in exchange for labor, a reality star reduced to ranch hand barter. From there, the next move is pure survival instinct. Apply to every reality competition series that will accept a familiar face with a high tolerance for humiliation. Anything that involves contestants voting someone out would likely end quickly, because public sentiment is not exactly trending in his favor. Bankruptcy is floated as a plausible epilogue because the lifestyle has always depended on television money, not sustainable fundamentals. Robyn's projected post-series strategy is less frantic and more controlled. Stay put, keep the house, preserve the optics, and begin the victim tour. Morning talk shows, podcasts, carefully delivered monologues about suffering through a marriage with a man framed as unstable and cruel. And in the background, the ever-present motherly counsel. Get her scent out there. Meaning, find a replacement provider with enough patience, or desperation, to buy the rebrand. Not everyone buys this breakup narrative, and the counter-arguments are telling. One school of thought insists the marriage survives quite easily as long as Cody is given a distraction, a hobby that keeps him out of the house and out of her space. Another points to Robyn's apparent lack of experience with quality men, suggesting she may sincerely believe Cody is a prize because the comparative sample size has been unimpressive. Others argue the show remains too valuable to end soon, and that everyone involved will continue milking the cash cow until viewership actually drops. Because there is no moral exit when there is still money on the table. Then there is the alternative endgame. Not divorce, but expansion. Some predict Cody will hunt for another wife or two to reignite the premise and keep the checks coming. The logic is simple. The franchise thrives on courtship drama, not on prolonged domestic sulking. The caveat in this scenario is that Cody may tolerate additional wives, but reject additional children. No more babies, no stepchildren, no new obligations that outlive the television contract. Skeptics of the Robyn leaves theory argue that she cannot keep the house without Cody because divorce typically means a 50-50 split of marital assets. In that view, the deed rumor about Alice becomes not gossip, but necessity. Without it, Robyn's post-divorce finances look thin, especially if her income is tied to the franchise. This same argument flips the power dynamic. Cody, unpleasant as he may be, is seen as more capable of finding a replacement partner quickly. Some even predict a rapid rebound in the style of opportunistic, headline-driven reality figures. Meanwhile, Robyn is described as broadly unpopular, with a damaged public image that would make reinvention difficult. The harsh conclusion is that Cody can outlast her in the marketplace of reality television, and she knows it. Yet even among those who expect no divorce, one point is repeated with suspicious consistency. Robyn controls Cody. She has what she wants, he enables it, and the arrangement continues because it works. For her. If there is a shopping addiction in the household, the implication is that it is indulged, not corrected. In that light, leaving would not be liberation, it would be risk. As for Cody's future career prospects, the consensus is bleakly straightforward. He will chase relevance. Competition shows, physical challenge formats, anything with a casting director willing to convert notoriety into ratings. Past appearances on demanding reality formats are cited as proof he can endure the grind. And if the industry's appetite for spectacle remains intact, even a stint on something like Dancing with the Stars or Survivor is treated as entirely plausible. Not because it makes sense, but because nothing about the reality ecosystem is designed to make sense. In the end, the bleakest truth may be the simplest. The franchise does not conclude with poetic justice or cathartic closure. It concludes with whatever outcome preserves the most money, protects the most assets, and offers the easiest narrative to sell afterward. Whether that means divorce papers, a new wife, or another season of recycled tension depends less on personal growth than on contracts, ratings, and who manages to keep the house. Cody's apology tour isn't remorse. It's a supply run. Cody is, once again, confronting the central tragedy of his adulthood. The world is no longer arranged in a perfect circle around him. For roughly 2 decades, he enjoyed the kind of rotational access that guarantees maximal fanfare. A man shows up every 4th day, eventually less, and the household energy spikes on cue. People scramble. Attention gets competed for. The mere act of entering a room becomes a performance with an audience. Now he lives in a home that sees him every day, and the cruel truth reveals itself. Daily proximity does not generate applause. It generates familiarity. And familiarity, to someone addicted to being treated like an event, is indistinguishable from neglect. Robyn, meanwhile, appears spectacularly unqualified to fill the attention vacuum she helped create. A single wife and a couple of kids cannot replicate the emotional infrastructure of 3 other women and a sprawling family, all calibrated, voluntarily or not, to feed one man's ego. Worse, she has lately seemed to recoil from his touch, which is not exactly consistent with the passionate, can't keep their hands off each other narrative being sold. The insistence that this is still a great love story, complete with an allegedly very active sex life, lands less like romance and more like a press release nobody requested. The children in the home offer even less comfort. Sol appears largely unmoved by Cody's presence, as though a showboating patriarch registers as background noise. Ari, with the devastating efficiency of a child who has never learned to flatter, meets grand announcements, Coyote Pass included, with a blunt, "Is that it?" No awe, no reverence, no participation in the shtick. Dayton is an adult with a job, which tends to reduce one's availability for serving as a live-in ego support system. That leaves Aurora and Brianna. Except Aurora now has a boyfriend and has aged out of the theatrics that once reliably generated attention. The bench is thin, and the star still expects a standing ovation. This is where the so-called apology tour enters, not as growth, not as accountability, and certainly not as concern for the children, but as a strategic hunt for narcissistic supply. With the original 3 wives no longer orbiting him, there is nobody left to triangulate against Robyn. No rivalries to ignite, no shifting alliances to manage, no rotating stages on which to rehearse the role of misunderstood hero. So the apologies function as an extraction operation. Regain attention from the OG3, stir enough emotional interaction to prove he still has impact, and, ideally, pressure them into stopping talking about him. Because nothing says remorse like requesting silence. The content of these apologies reinforces the point. They are framed around his feelings, his wounds, his need for relief, his insistence that the situation be repackaged into something he can live with. Notably absent is the simplest, most obvious question in any sincere repair attempt. What about the kids? The conspicuous refusal to ask, even once, lands as the clearest evidence that the tour is about image management, not reconciliation. There is also the practical incentive everyone can see from orbit: the show. The family has moved in separate directions, as people do when the marriage structure implodes, but the production still needs interaction to justify airtime. Conveniently, apologies provide a tidy mechanism to keep people talking to each other on camera without the inconvenience of genuine intimacy or meaningful change. It is a plot device masquerading as personal growth, and none of this is new. The need to be the center of attention predates the marriages. It is an operating system, not a symptom. 4 wives were never enough to satisfy a massive ego, so the idea that one wife will suddenly do the job is optimistic in the way only denial can be. In fact, with Robyn now receiving the full blast of his attention, she will also receive the full blast of his judgment. The comments about her limitations, particularly around physical capability, signal a man already compiling grievances, as though disappointment were her betrayal rather than his entitlement, which leads to the inevitable conclusion. He is already auditioning the concept of new. When Robyn arrived, she was novel, exciting, and sexually energizing compared to relationships that had years of history and fatigue. Now, she is no longer new. and novelty is the one resource his personality cannot manufacture internally. The prospect of another wife solves multiple problems at once: a fresh supply of adoration, a rebuilt triangle to play in, and, most importantly, a pitchable storyline. A newer, younger, more sexual version of Robyn would not merely feed the ego. It would create a clean commercial argument for extended relevance and continued employment. So yes, boredom is part of it, but boredom is only the surface symptom. The deeper issue is that Cody does not experience family as relationship. He experiences it as audience. When the audience disperses, he does not adjust. He goes on tour. The biggest scam in this story is that Robyn gets billed as the mastermind, while Cody gets treated like an innocent bystander. And that narrative is exactly how he keeps getting away with it. Cody is the obvious problem, yet Robyn keeps getting cast as the cinematic villain, some flawless strategist executing a decade-long con. That fantasy gives her far too much credit, and him far too much relief. The more accurate read is both simpler and less flattering. Two manipulative adults, neither of them brilliant, playing directly to their worst instincts and calling it family. Cody presents as the leader and behaves like a man who mistook authority for competence. Whether the label is patriarch or cult leader, the operating system is the same. A misogynistic hierarchy designed to manufacture loyalty through wives and offspring. The trouble is, he was never particularly good at the job. He wanted followers, not relationships. And when the emotional labor got inconvenient, especially with his children, he chose the one skill he actually has: blame shifting. The collapse of those relationships is not a mystery, and it is not anyone else's responsibility to fix. His choices created the distance. His refusal to be a consistent father kept it there. Robyn, meanwhile, does not need to be a mastermind to do damage. Manipulation does not require genius. It requires opportunity. And Cody, being exceptionally easy to steer, offered plenty of it. The playing dumb persona works because it fits the environment, a system where plausible innocence is rewarded and accountability is optional. If the goal was influence, being the head wife, calling the shots, positioning the golden family as the center of gravity, then the method was basic. Encourage the narrative that the fractures were everyone else's fault, and let Cody enthusiastically do the dirty work. The more conspiratorial version claims she engineered the exits, hoarded assets, and intends to leave once the show is officially over, taking everything with her as the final flourish. It is a neat story, but it is not necessary to explain what happened. A simpler explanation exists: an accumulation of self-serving behavior paired with the expectation that the money and attention would keep flowing indefinitely. In that frame, the other wives and kids were not opponents to outmaneuver. They were background characters, expected to tolerate perpetual disrespect while she occupied the mansion on the hill role with moral immunity. Even early on, the financial narrative raises the same question. Was there documentation for the debt she claimed to assume from her ex? Or was a vague story enough to unlock family resources? Either possibility is unflattering. If there was no proof and money moved anyway, that is not strategic brilliance. It is reckless enabling by a man who never met a responsibility he could not outsource. None of this rehabilitates Robyn. Not a diabolical mastermind grifter is not a compliment. It is merely a correction. Greed, self-interest, and emotional manipulation are still ugly when performed without sophistication. But shifting primary blame onto her is equally ugly, because it quietly treats Cody like a helpless bystander in his own household. A narrative that is both absurd and conveniently misogynistic. He is not a puppet. He is an adult who repeatedly chose favoritism, laziness, and control over basic decency. So, yes, Robyn is manipulative and terrible, in the way people are terrible when they believe the rules do not apply to them. But Cody is the architect of the system that let it flourish, the one who weaponized it against his wives and children, and the one solely responsible for his relationship with his kids. If there is an idiot here, it is not the person benefiting from the chaos. It is the man who built the chaos, enjoyed it, and still expects applause for watching it burn. That apology wasn't deep. It was marketing, with better lighting. Watching Janelle describe Cody's apology as laying it on heavy is a small masterclass in how language can either clarify a situation or accidentally flatter the very behavior it's supposed to expose. The phrase is not a compliment, not a marker of emotional depth, and certainly not a sign of meaningful accountability. It is a polite way of saying someone is piling on exaggerated sentiment, excessive flattery, and carefully measured remorse to get what they want. In other words, it signals awareness of manipulation. So, if the intent was to suggest he was being profound, that would be an unusually generous misunderstanding of a well-established idiom. If the intent was to suggest she recognized the performance as a performance, then the bright smile reads less like being moved and more like indulging a man who has mistaken theatrics for growth. That distinction matters, because the reaction on display is what makes the scene so baffling. The visible portion of the exchange does not exactly scream transformational reckoning. It plays more like a familiar routine, a contrite monologue, a receptive audience, and a conveniently low standard for what qualifies as a serious apology. There is, of course, the ever-present caveat that nothing shown is raw reality. The conversation reportedly lasted far longer than the edited segment, which means the audience is asked to judge a relationship's turning point through a selectively curated highlight reel. Between production-driven setups and editorial choices, the truth is always partially off-screen, and sometimes entirely elsewhere. Even with that allowance, what remains striking is what does not surface with any urgency. An apology tour aimed at former spouses is, at best, secondary to repairing the damage done to the children and addressing those fractured relationships directly. That omission should have been the centerpiece, not an afterthought. Instead, the moment lands with Janelle appearing to soften prematurely, offering explanations before he has even finished speaking, and generally demonstrating a readiness to accept the bare minimum as if it were a rare luxury item. It is less forgiveness than reflex, an eager-to-please posture that feels unearned, given the history, and not uniquely so, considering the same accommodating dynamic has appeared elsewhere. The most plausible read is also the least flattering to the scene's supposed emotional weight. After nearly 4 decades of familiarity, it is difficult to believe she did not immediately recognize the mechanics of the pitch. If she clocked the manipulation from the first sentence, smiling through it becomes a strategic choice. Give him the response he wants. Let the cameras capture their neat little narrative beat, and then return to real life the moment the lights go down, which is, inconveniently, the part that rarely makes it into the episode. The conversations that actually matter tend to happen when no one is producing them. Never mistake a 5-minute, heavily edited apology for accountability. That's not remorse, it's damage control. An apology tour is an interesting concept, assuming the goal is accountability and not yet another carefully lit performance designed to rehabilitate reputations without the inconvenience of actual remorse. The version worth watching is straightforward. Cody shows up in person to each of his children and apologizes. Not in the abstract, not in a confessional, not through a proxy, a producer, or a conveniently edited montage. Individually, directly, repeatedly if necessary, because the damage was not a single incident. It was a pattern. And then there is Robyn, whose apology tour would be equally simple and dramatically overdue. a direct apology to Janelle, Mary, and Christine. Preferably delivered without theatrical fragility, strategic tears, or the kind of tenderness that seems to require everyone else to lower their voice and expectations. If the show insists on calling itself reality television, it could start by letting uncomfortable reality into the room. Better still, Cody and Robyn do it together, apologizing to everyone individually, as a united front of accountability, rather than a tag team of deflection. The key condition is not the optics of contrition, it is the behavior during it. That means listening to what comes back, without storming off, shutting down, or turning the response into an attack on the messenger. An apology that cannot tolerate a reply is not an apology. It is a press release. If that feels too ambitious, there is always the ultimate solution. A proper tell-all, not the soft focus, pre-approved version that gets trimmed down to a sanitized 5 minutes after someone has notes in the editing bay. A real tell-all. The whole family in the room. Questions asked in a way that prevents the usual escape hatches. And Cody and Robyn required to face the music in real time. If the full cast cannot be assembled because one person's emotional stamina is treated as the production's central limitation, then at minimum, the format should stop pretending that avoidance is closure. There is, however, an inconvenient truth beneath the fantasy. The original children appear finished with this machine. An apology tour would demand their participation, and participation would become content, fuel for a narrative that benefits the same people who created the fracture in the first place. It is difficult to imagine genuine repair while cameras are still monetizing the fallout. Even after the show ends, the odds remain slim, because trust, once repeatedly spent and publicly mishandled, does not regenerate on a seasonal schedule. And for those who insist on a highly scripted version of contrition, an apology with required phrasing, mandated bullet points, and a pre-negotiated emotional arc, there is a final, sobering point. Preconditions can become their own obstacle. No one can force sincerity into existence, and even a perfectly delivered speech can leave the recipient wondering whether the words were spoken because they were demanded, not because they were meant. At some point, reconciliation becomes a decision about what can realistically be rebuilt from the current reality, not from an idealized performance of repentance. So yes, an apology tour could be compelling, but only if it is real. Direct apologies, individual accountability, sustained listening, and nowhere to run. Otherwise, it is just another episode of image management, marketed as healing, edited as theater, and received exactly as it deserves. If a reality show can spend 10 minutes on eggs, this breakdown is for anyone still pretending the plot matters. Shawnee's performance at the fundraiser managed to turn a breakfast service into a masterclass in petty theatrics. The raised hand in Amber's face, the mean girl's energy, and the bizarrely superior tone while eggs were being cooked, as if a skillet were thrown. It was less fundraiser hospitality and more social hierarchy audition, made all the more mortifying by how casually it was delivered. And hovering over the entire spectacle was Mary, apparently treating the menu like a personality test. Fried eggs positioned as the gold standard, with the faint implication that someone's moral character could be measured by whether they scramble. Naturally, this was presented as if it mattered. For a full, indulgent stretch of screen time, the narrative clung to the scrambled versus fried question as though breakfast contained nothing else. Fruit, sausage, juice, pancakes. Just this one allegedly critical egg decision, milked for drama until the absurdity became the point. At this rate, the only logical escalation is a tell-all interrogation into pancake syrup inventory, complete with Cody staring blankly and refusing to answer. because nothing says gripping television like condiment secrecy. Yet the supposed centerpiece conflict barely existed. What actually played out was closer to a hen party, with Ron parked politely on the perimeter, a mild miscommunication reframed as tension, and then smoothed over with joking. Anticlimactic in the extreme. Even the practical logic collapsed under basic scrutiny. Fried eggs being labeled easier for feeding a large group is an impressive claim when large groups generally require efficiency, batching, and something resembling planning. And what huge crowd was being served exactly? The handful of attendees milling about? The modest number at the tables? If this is the scale that justifies culinary panic, the show has officially entered the era of manufactured catastrophe over routine logistics. Which, to be fair, is increasingly the whole operation. Whenever boredom threatens to become honest, a faux crisis is staged with flimsy plotting, awkward settings, and acting that insists viewers pretend an egg preference is an emotional landmine. The more revealing subplot, however, is the reaction surrounding it. An eagerness to declare Mary monstrous for a scene in which she was notably calm, repeatedly thanked Amber, and called the eggs lovely, while still being plainly wrong about fried eggs as the easy option. The insistence that every minor moment proves cruelty is not analysis. It is a pre-written verdict searching for evidence. Meanwhile, others in the orbit receive far less scrutiny, as though selective outrage were a hobby. In this ecosystem, Mary cannot even breathe incorrectly without it being filed as misconduct, an exhausting double standard made even more ridiculous by the fact that the scandal in question amounted to breakfast banter, with production fingerprints all over it. The kind of nudged confrontation that other reality families have openly described as standard operating procedure. Subscribe.